Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Spoiler Piece Theater, the podcast that doesn't give a shit about spoilers. We just want to talk about the movies. My name is Dave Riedel. My pronouns are he, him. I write about movies, and I'm a member of the Boston Online Film Critics Association.
My name is Evan Crean. My pronouns are he, him. I'm co-chair of the Boston Online Film Critics Association, co-author of your 80s Movie Guide to Better Living, and co-host of the It's the Pictures podcast.
And my name is Megan Kearns. My pronouns are she, her. I write film reviews for Edge Media Network. I'm a co-host of the Slashers podcast. I, too, am a member of the Boston Online Film Critics Association and a member of Gallica, the Society of LGBTQ Entertainment Critics.
Salute. This week on the show, we got a couple movies to talk about, but before we do that, I want to mention that over on our Patreon, we are talking about the 1983 John Carpenter film Christine, or as it says on camera or on film, John Carpenter's Christine. And I really wished it had said John Carpenter's Stephen King's Christine. but it doesn't.
That would have been amazing.
So anyway, if you're a patron, you can go check that out now. And if you're not a patron, please consider becoming one, because for $5 a month, you get a bonus episode each week, and you get to vote in a poll at the end of the month to tell us what to watch. Yay. Okay. Mm-hmm. So this week on the show, we are talking about two movies. We're talking about Dinah. You just told me how to pronounce it, and I already forgot. Dinah Opusic's Tuesday, starring Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and then the documentary Outstanding, A Comedy Revolution, which is on Netflix. So Megan and I saw Tuesday, so we'll talk about it. And here is your one-sentence IMDb summary. I should do the press notes like you do, Megan, but it's too late to look them up.
Thanks.
A mother and her teenage daughter must confront death, capital D, when it arrives in the form of an astonishing talking bird. That is accurate.
It's fairly accurate.
I mean, that's basically the whole crux of the movie. There's no subplot to this movie.
Mm-hmm. Nope.
Just death as a bird.
Interesting choice. I mean, I know that death comes in many forms. So anyway, it's just what I said. So Julia Louis-Dreyfus is an American mother living in England, and her daughter has some unspecified terminal illness and is on death's door. And this bird that looks like, what do you call like parrots and macaws and things like that? Like birds of paradise or something like that? I don't know. It's got lovely plumage, as Monty Python would say.
Birds of paradise.
Exactly.
We're squawking on heaven's door.
He's back, folks. So Julia Louis-Dreyfus is the mom, and Lola Pettigrew is the daughter, and the movie opens with death as the bird intervening to take the lives of, I guess, 3 people. A woman who's been stabbed, which I didn't even realize that was what happened at first until you see from the back. Defocus. I'm like, what's the red stuff? I had one of those moments where I was just like, what the, you know?
Well, she's also saying that he didn't mean it. He stabbed me. He didn't mean it.
Multiple knife wounds in her back, so I think he meant it.
I think so too. But she is saying, like, not saying that verbally, like
Right.
the bird death can hear her thoughts.
The bird can hear everybody who's dying. The bird can hear their thoughts. And basically they're asking to be released from whatever pain they're in. So you see death take this woman. It takes an older woman who spits on him first. But yeah.
Amazing.
And then you see this guy lying in an alley who's just looks like he's having a heart attack or something. It doesn't really matter. Death comes with compassion. And then you meet Tuesday, the daughter. She's at home, basically in home hospice care, I guess you would say, or palliative care or whatever. And she starts having breathing problems. The bird hears, and the bird comes in. And how does death decide not to take her initially? I don't even remember. Oh, it's because it has some glue stuck on its feet. And she's like, oh, let me help you get that glue off your feet. And the bird's like...
Well, before that, she tells Death a joke.
That's right. She tells the penguin joke. I heard that joke when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So... Well, when she starts telling the joke, it doesn't sound like a joke. It sounds like she's telling a real story. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
this is the joke where the guy's got the carload of penguins and the cop says, take him to the zoo. And then he pulls him over again the next day. He's like, what are you doing with those penguins? He's like, well, we had so much fun at the zoo. Today we're going to the beach. It's like the ultimate dad joke. So,
Yep. That's why I laughed as hard
so
as I
Death
did.
thinks that joke is really funny. And Tuesday gives Death a bath because, as he says, I'm filthy, or whatever he says. And he's
and that's how his voice is.
Being crazy. That's what he sounds like.
You're not doing Christian Bale as Batman.
No. No, because he hasn't talked in a really, really long time, so he has difficulty talking at first.
Although he never gets over that guttural kind of, and then he's got a sling blade sort of that he does when he's pondering whether or not he is. To me, it seems like you say something and he's like not quite sure how to react to it, and he goes like, So anyway, Death takes a holiday, to coin a phrase, and hangs out with Tuesday, and Tuesday's like, can you stay with me until my mom comes back? Because Julia Louis-Dreyfus is being very avoidant of the whole situation. And so she finally comes home, and Tuesday's like, hey, Death is here and it's a bird. And Julia Louis-Dreyfus sets it on fire and eats it. So after
bashing it
and stuff like that.
Okay. Wow. Well,
and
then what
then
happens?
she starts having to do Death's job because she starts hearing the voices.
And changing shape,
like
just like Death does, like changing size. From
the
small
bird
to,
changes
large.
size depending on what it's needed for, and so she starts doing Death's job. She's hauling around Tuesday on her back, and she's making things better for people. Although the movie does this thing where there are increasingly more people who should be dying who can't die, and it's kind of becoming fucking mayhem. Like you see this one guy who I think is like a cable repairman or something. His legs have been severed, and he's screaming, crawling across the road, and you're like, ugh. And it's just like, oh, this is what's happening since Death is not doing anything except hanging out with Tuesday and then having been swallowed by her mother.
Yeah. Don't forget the bugs, the swarms of bugs,
the zombie
and the zombie cows.
Yeah, all these cows that are being slaughtered for these cows that are being slaughtered for butchery are they got the thing in
They're
the
not
head,
dying.
like from No Country for Old Men, but they're still just standing there in the barn like moo. So that one of them actually does say that, subtitle and all. Not really. And so finally Julia Louis-Dreyfus is like, I heard your voice and you're in so much pain, and then she says like, I don't know who I am without you. I don't know what I'm going to do. And then she takes Tuesday home, and Death takes Tuesday, and then we spend another 20 minutes with Julia Louis-Dreyfus figuring out how she's going to live the rest of her life. So
as Death.
She spits Death up at one point. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And they have a conversation, and that's when she goes back to Tuesday, and she's like, honey, have you ever wished for death? And Tuesday admits, yes, she has. And yeah, that's when she says, like, I've heard you. I felt your pain. Yeah. So no, she has relinquished her job as Death. And she thinks when Death comes back, she's like, are you here to kill me? And Death's like, no.
Yeah.
He's like, I wanted to know how you were doing.
And it's like, oh.
Yeah, which is very cute. Yeah, I saw this a couple months ago at the Independent Film Festival in Boston, and I was really excited to see this because I'm like, Death personified, and it's a bird, yeah, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, yes, and a woman director, yes, ticking all the boxes. And I liked this the first time I saw this. It made me very emotional when this scene between Julia Louis-Dreyfus and her daughter, and she's talking about, you don't have to worry about me. I'll be okay. And her daughter's like, really? And she's like, yeah. And she's like, you promise? And it's funny because promise is something that I say with a friend of mine. And so it's a very sweet, touching, wrenching scene. And then I like that we stay with Julia Louis-Dreyfus because the whole point is how to incorporate death into your life. Like, how do you deal with it? How do you face death? How do you, move not beyond it, but through it? And how do you live with it? And the film really seems to have a respect and reverence for death, which is interesting in a way I haven't always seen in other films. So I liked that, and I kind of liked the bird, and I liked the actor who voiced the bird, who's Arinze Kenny, who was also in I Am Your Woman, which is such a great film, and he was great in that. So yeah, I liked this, but I don't know, I have kind of a problem with it too, which is there's something. I'm not a physically disabled person, but I have heard many disabled critics and disabled activists talk about how films often treat people who are disabled as if they should be dead, and as if it's the worst thing ever. And I know that this film is different because Tuesday has a terminal illness, but there's something weird. There's something kind of off about the way that she's asking for death that felt very ableist to me, that didn't quite sit well. Yeah, so that kind of bothered me. I think Julie Louis-Dreyfus is really great in this performance. Sometimes I don't want to say she could have been better, but there are certain scenes that I'm like, it didn't feel quite as authentic as maybe it could have. But there's other scenes that I think are really wrenching and really emotional that I think she's really spectacular in. But yeah, I didn't always feel connected between her and her daughter. They almost, and I don't know, there's something about their rapport that didn't always feel like they were mother and daughter. And maybe it's because Julia Louis-Dreyfus's character is so avoidant, like you said, Dave, and so she's very checked out in certain scenes, and that kind of, I guess, I kind of feel that on screen with some of their interactions. But yeah, so I guess to say there are parts I liked a lot and parts that didn't work for me. But yeah.
Yeah. So this is definitely a mixed bag for me. I think that I like the idea of having death as a character, death on screen. I spent a lot of my early teen years reading about death, not because I was wishing for it, but just because I thought it was cool. And I still do question the logic of having death be a giant bird that speaks in guttural things, because the first three people you see death approach, they're not happy to see death, even though they're like in tremendous pain and things like that. And death does cuddle the second person that he takes. You know, he kills her basically, and then he takes her literally under his wing and like nuzzles her. But it's like, shouldn't you do that before?
Yeah.
And I just don't know how good I would feel in my final moments if a giant bird flew up to me and was just like, I'm not going to talk. I'm going to look like a giant bird with my weird beak and my strange tongue. And, I don't know. It was just the death as it is a compassionate character, and death has compassion for, let's just use the word victims, for its victims. But I really didn't. I mean, I guess you can't have like some dude in a suit carrying a scythe and be like, I'm death, you know. But just,
I mean, isn't that Meet Joe Black?
That's a
Isn't he
terrible
death and he's in a
movie.
suit? I didn't say it was good. I'm just saying, but isn't he death
yes,
and he's
but
in a
he
suit?
also only one person knows he's death. Only I was going to say Anthony Michael Hall, Anthony Hopkins. Only Anthony Hopkins knows that he's death.
That's fair.
He's just like a weird dude to everybody else.
Fair.
And I think my problem with this more than anything is the tone, the shifting tone from like gut-wrenching drama to like weird slapstick comedy. And I think one of the things that kind of hinders Julia Louis-Dreyfus's performance is like she's got to keep acting like she's going to throw up this fucking bird. You know, it's like, how are we supposed to be dramatic when she's going like your cat before it has a hairball? You know, I mean, I don't.
Yeah,
it's a strange choice. That being said, I don't necessarily think that the right choice would be to be completely somber the whole time. But I don't know. It's just, I mean, this movie's all over the place. I think ultimately the scene that Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Tuesday have as she's dying back at their home is very
that's a great scene.
Sweet and sad and affecting.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of this is just kind of feels like I don't know. I didn't latch onto it. That's not to say it's bad. I don't
Mhm.
think it's bad, but this is kind of like, how we have Evan movies and not
Mhm.
Evan movies. Yeah, well,
Sounds like
it's
not an
also
Evan
not
movie.
really a Dave movie, So, yeah, I don't know. It's I think more than anything, it's a tone thing, because there's just something so absurd about Julia Louis-Dreyfus chasing the bird all over the bedroom and trying to like slap it away, and you just want to say to her like, "It's death, lady. It ain't going anywhere. I mean, you can eat it, but it's coming back." So I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I think actually that reaction felt authentic to me, because if she can't handle the fact that she has a terminally ill child, and she can't handle the fact that she's had to quit her job in order to take care of her, and she keeps leaving the house pretending that she's going to work, and she's selling off all of their like antiques and things in order to survive, and she keeps acting distant and cold with her daughter because she can't face reality. I think that kind of makes sense that she wouldn't be facing the reality of, yeah, death is here. Death is tangibly, physically here. To me, it makes sense that she would react that way. And also, as a parent, that she would want to prevent anything from taking her child. So, on those levels, that actually kind of worked for me. But I really dug the kind of weird fable fairy tale vibe that was going on. I was not a fan of the tonal shifts, because I think if the humor had worked for me, maybe I would have been a lot more forgiving or enjoyable of the tonal shifts. But yeah, it didn't. The humor fell flat for me, so it didn't quite work. But the absurdity of the premise, I was in. I was like, this is nuts. I'm here for
Well, I
this.
also should mention that, and this will either bother people or it won't, the special effects in this movie are highly variable. Like, the bird itself actually looks pretty good, but every time Julia Louis-Dreyfus
the bird
gets
does.
bigger and smaller, it looks so fucking corny. And it's like, it looks like almost like the early 80s when you could see the outline of the person that they were, you know what I mean? That they were superimposing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't notice that, and I saw this on my laptop and on the big screen.
I noticed it. But there were other times when Julia Louis-Dreyfus as a giant looked good, and I think that's probably because they made a tiny little ceiling for her to bump her head into,
Right. Yes. That's specifically what I was thinking. That scene, I was like, actually,
but like
that
when
looks
she's
quite
walking
good.
through the meadow, and she's,
Oh, you're right. That looks terrible. No, you're 100% right. That scene looks terrible. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a mixed bag for me. It's, I generally don't love fables, so it makes sense that this fabulistic film would not really rock my boat, but sounds like you liked it more than I did, Megan.
Yeah, I liked parts of it. I'm curious what you thought of the ending where Death is talking to Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and she's like, well, first she's like begging to be killed, because she's like, there's no point. I have no life here. And, I know you can't tell me if there's a God or not, or an afterlife, but,
and then Death,
I don't, whatever. And then
no
Death
afterlife.
reveals, like, there is no God.
There is, sorry.
Well, no, there is, but not the way you think, right? It's the reverberations of the lives and voices and everything.
And
that's
Death
the
basically
afterlife.
tells her, if you want Tuesday to have a happy afterlife, you will continue on.
Right.
So until your natural demise, whenever that is.
Right. Yeah. But I do think it's interesting, kind of the last line of the film is her last line saying, "Get up, woman." Like, you know, she's
Death
got
says
like,
that to
gotta get a
her
move on.
earlier
But I don't know.
sometime. I don't remember.
Yeah, yeah. But it's an I don't know. It's not a completely depressing ending, but it's also not a hopeful ending. It's kind of just like matter of fact, like,
Yeah, and I
well,
think
here
I
we
kind of
are. Gotta
prefer
do
that.
this.
Just like it's not like, well, I know she's gone, but I gotta get up because it's another day. You know, it's just more like, oh, gotta make the
Right,
donuts.
right.
You know, so
Yeah. I do like that it's
yeah.
not like, well, she's in a better place. Like, ugh, I hate that
Yeah,
attitude.
me too. Well, do you have any final thoughts about Tuesday?
No, but I do agree with you that it's an uneven film. But I think it's an interesting premise, and I do also wonder. I do wonder if there's maybe like in Croatian, I don't know, like lore, mythology, or something.
Maybe. I
Maybe
mean,
death
death
is a
comes in
bird.
many
I don't know.
forms. So
I was thinking about that. Right. And I was thinking of like, you know, in various mythologies, you know, death does take many forms and sometimes animals. So
Yeah.
anyway, I was very curious about that. But yeah, but no, I definitely liked parts of this. I think Julia Louis-Dreyfus is really good in this, but yeah,
okay.
but it is uneven.
Yeah,
But I did like it.
fine.
I don't know if I
Yeah.
need to see it again
Well,
because I've seen it
let's
twice
move
now.
on to our last movie of the evening. This is what did I say it was called? Outstanding. A Comedy Revolution. This is written, directed by Paige Hurwitz. Every comedian you've ever heard of is in this movie. And this is, well, let me read you the IMDb. A feature-length documentary that explores the history of LGBTQ plus stand-up comedy, considering its importance as an instrument for social change over the past 5 decades. 5 decades? I mean, more, really, because they go all the way back to the 20s with like Moms Mabley and stuff like that. So, well, I talked a lot and Megan talked a lot about Tuesday, and Evan, you didn't talk at all because it's almost like you didn't see it. So, yeah, it is exactly like that.
It's exactly
What did
like
you
that.
think of Outstanding, A Comedy Revolution?
What was interesting when I first started watching this is that I didn't realize that this documentary is basically a spin-off of a comedy special that Netflix aired back in 2022, which I had seen, called Stand Out, an LGBTQ plus celebration, which was a stand-up special featuring, I believe they said 22 LGBTQ plus performers. And so I kind of felt like, oh, this is pretty self-serving Netflix. Basically kind of like repackaging content that you did a couple of years ago. I mean, it was a fun comedy special. I was glad to see it. I believe it dropped during Pride Month back then, as this is now. And so I was a little bit skeptical kind of going into it, thinking, all right, I saw the comedy special. Now I feel like we're, just repackaging content. And I did like it. It's very standard documentary talking head format. It feels a little cursory in some places in terms of like it's chronicling of history of queer history, but I like that it kind of leans into the personalities of the comedians and kind of just talks with different comedians and kind of shifts focus to someone else who was inspired by that person. So we have like Lily Tomlin and definitely like one of the main people that's featured, and just so many other different comedians. Scott Thompson from Kids in the Hall, um, Todd Glass, Judy Gold, Eddie Izzard. So it's like Hannah Gadsby. It's pretty much like a who's who of queer comedians. Margaret Cho, Joel Kim Booster, and I liked hearing comedians and their inspiration from other comics that came before them, and talking about how it's in the queer community, it's very much like a mentor based situation where you find people who mentor you and kind of show you the way. And in comedy, I liked that they were talking about there was a distinct lack of gay male role models for many of the comedians, and so they looked to women who were queer comedians for inspiration. And I liked all that. So it felt very formulaic. I feel like on the whole, it's not one that I thought was like mind blowing or gave me any kind of, information I had never heard of or anything like that. But I found that it was a pretty solid time, and I liked seeing all these different comedians talking about comedy and the history of, LGBTQ plus comedy, even though it felt kind of cursory and light in some ways.
Ah, Megan.
Yeah, I actually agree with all of that, Evan. I do think this documentary gets better as it goes along.
Mhm.
But in the beginning, I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, we're literally spending like 30 seconds talking about Stonewall, and we don't even mention that Stonewall was a riot and it was started by two trans women of color, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. Really? We're not even going to mention
Mhm.
their names? Like, what the fuck? So I was highly irritated. But then as the documentary goes on, it gets a bit better as different, like you said, different comedians, talking about Moms Mabley or Mabley, and then talking about other comedians throughout time, like in the 20s and 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so I liked that. I like that we get history. I wish we'd gotten more history. I wish it would have been more
Yeah.
detailed. I wish
Felt
we
a little
got
light.
yeah, very. It's very superficial, unfortunately, which feels weird because I kept thinking, okay, who is the audience? Is it talking to other queer people? Is it talking to straight people? Who is it both? Because
Mhm.
if you're talking to queer people you could argue will know our own history, but not every queer person does. So, and then if you're talking to straight people, they may not know also. So shouldn't you get into it? So it felt weird, and I kept thinking like, who is this for? So there's
Mhm.
that. And then I like that they talk about transphobia in comedy and outside of comedy. But at the same time, it felt like they were just waiting with all the trans comics and non-binary comics till the very end. And then
Mhm.
it just like, it's like, oh, hey, here we are. And it's like, well, no, why wasn't this threaded throughout the documentary more? Which just felt really bizarre to me. And yeah, so there's some really odd editing choices,
Yeah.
and it's structured very oddly. Like it's kind of in a linear way, but kind of not.
Yeah,
And it
it's
just,
both chronological and not.
yeah, it's weird. But I agree with you that the parts that work the best are when we get to spend time with
Yeah.
the comedians, which is never really that much time because it's like, nope, gotta get to the next, move,
Right.
move.
There's some
And but
clips from that special in there too.
right, of course. But yeah, but I will say, I think that the parts that resonated the most for me there's a couple. I love when Margaret Cho, and I do love Margaret Cho. I love when she
Mhm.
talks about how comedy is how we dealt with trauma. And she talks about how trauma from homophobia, racism, sexism, and transphobia, and just not being accepted by society at large is traumatic. And I really like that. And I like the talk of mentorship, like you said. I like the focus on joy and how important queer joy is to queer communities, because it is. And it's
Mhm.
something that I've noticed that not so many, but too many films, if they have queer characters or their queer storylines, they don't focus enough on the joy. It's just like, oh, the oppression and the trauma. And those are important too. But we
Yeah.
need the joy. We need that balance because that's so important, especially with community. The other thing I really, really, really loved is when Todd Glass was talking about how he was in the closet, and when he was talking about his heart attack, and how
Mhm.
Sarah Silverman knew he was gay, and he's like, call my girlfriend,
Yeah.
but it's his boyfriend. And I'm like, oh my God, this is awful. This is wrenching. And then,
Yeah.
afterwards he's finally like, I'm not doing this shit anymore. And I'm like, thank God, but that's so sad, but it's understandable, of course, why people stay closeted for as long as they do.
Mhm.
I also really liked, it's interesting to me that that it just says Eddie Izzard, because I know it's Eddie Susie Izzard. But I really like that she was talking about her journey, being gender fluid and being trans. And I think that was great. And
Mhm.
then the last part that I liked is I love this line is when Robin Tyler, who is a lesbian comedian and was out in the 70s. I love when she says, humor is the razor sharp edge of the truth. There's no such thing as just kidding. So if anybody does homophobic jokes, they mean it. And I love that because I'm so fucking sick and tired of people being like, oh, it's just a joke, lighten up. It's who cares? And it's like, no, it's like we should be punching, up, not punching down. And it's
Right.
ridiculous. And I also love that piggybacking off of that, Wanda Sykes, love Wanda Sykes. I love how she came out at a Prop 8 rally. And I remember when she came out and it was great. But I also love that she was talking about how comedy should move us forward and it should be a tool, for activism and for, shedding light on, social justice and for these issues. And so I love the comedians that they have. I love that we hear their stories. And when we get those really personal, intimate moments, there's just not
Mhm.
enough of those. So this was
Yeah.
a really uneven display all around for me.
Yeah, too cursory in places. I think I wanted to circle back to your comment about the kind of saving the trans and non-binary comedians to the end. I'm wondering if that had to do with feeling like they needed to tie it back to the kind of like current wave of transphobia, anti-trans legislation, and
Yep.
kind of thinking, well, we'll just like group those people in the back so that we can kind of nudge into whatever we feel like is the most recent commentary.
Right.
But I agree with you. It feels strange to kind of just lump them in at the end instead of kind of sprinkling them more throughout the
Right.
documentary.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that was the choice. And, and yes, we get Eddie Susie Izzard earlier. And yes, there is, I think Hannah Stryker is the historian. And we get them a little earlier too. But everybody else is just, like Mae Martin and River Butcher and so many, Patty Harrison, so many other trans
Yeah.
comedians we just get at the end. And I'm like, what the fuck? I wanted to hear what they had to say in the beginning. And so, and that kind of you run the risk whenever you do a broad documentary. You're not going to cover it all.
Why
It would
not?
have to be like 10 hours. Maybe this should have been a series instead. I don't know. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, but this just felt
Yeah.
way too superficial.
One thing I wanted to mention before I forget, and I'm sad I forgot to mention this earlier. To me, the most moving moment in the documentary was when Judy Gold was talking about having
Yes.
kids
Yes.
and talking about feeling that she had to come out. And it was important and vital for her as a parent, if she's going to be talking about her family and about her life, that she needed to do it with pride and she needed to live with pride and go out there and, be herself and be her true full self. And I found that incredibly moving. And
Yes, absolutely.
as a parent now, it hit me even harder thinking like, it's so that's such an important sentiment. And you were talking about queer joy earlier, and I think that definitely plays into it. The importance of her being able to go out there and be her true authentic self and to live with pride and live with joy and to celebrate that. And so I just that really unexpected moment for me really hit home.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Evan, because that was on my list too of parts I loved, and there were a lot, and I missed that one, so I'm so glad. But yeah, that was really great. I love that she mentioned that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add because I feel pretty much the same way you both do. The thing that stuck out to me the most was just how many huge comics there are now, like Joel Kim Booster, who's in the documentary for what, like 2.5 minutes? I mean, it's like one of the biggest comedians working anywhere right now. It's like, we're going to gloss over that. And I don't know. It was just kind of nice to see a lot of comedians I've always admired in one place. That was cool. I'm glad that they got around to interviewing Scott Thompson because I was like, when is Scott Thompson going to show up? And then finally, but it's just kind of, it was just like, it was really bizarre. I mean, it went back and forth so much in time, but it also had that linear narrative, like you mentioned earlier. It was truly bizarre. And I understand why you would spend so much time, for example, on Lily Tomlin, because pioneering huge voice in comedy and in movies,
Mm-hmm.
and out for a long, long time, like one of the first. So it makes a lot of sense. But I feel like there was just some other names that got short shrift because of that. Even Sandra Bernhard, who they spend a decent amount of time on. I'm like, your career didn't end in 1985, which is kind of where they leave her,
Right.
Right.
And that's kind of like, they mentioned Scott Thompson in the Under the Cloak of the Kids in the Hall, but also what is it, Buddy Young? Is that the character? I know it's Buddy. I can never remember the character's whole name. But how there was such an out proudly gay character on TV with the Kids in the Hall, and it was a part of his act that he did earlier. But that just felt, it was like they all had one specific thing that they were gay for, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah. Like one soundbite, one perspective, one thing to say.
And then you have Margaret Cho, who's got a lot of, Asian American, queer, had a TV show, kind of ticks a lot of boxes. So there's more Margaret Cho, it was very strange to me as far as like the way this is put together. But in a way, some of it made sense because it sort of follows a logical, well, you start with, Lily Tomlin, and then she tells you about a few people maybe you hadn't thought about. And then you hear who they were influenced by and how da. And so in that way, it kind of makes sense. But at the same time, it doesn't come off as well as it could. Also because, there's no way that they interviewed all of these people for like 15 minutes and then they were done. I mean, they probably have...
Oh, of course not.
Hundreds of hours of footage. And then not to mention all the archival stuff.
Yes.
So I feel like this would have been better served as, a 4-part limited series or an 8-part limited series, because I think this movie's heart is obviously in the right place, but I think the final product is just kind of like, this is kind of like the foreword of the novel you're about to read,
Yes. It's just like an appetizer.
This is an amuse-bouche. The main,
yes, you just wanted to say amuse-bouche.
And the main course we have not been served yet. So, and I want Patty Harrison in my main course. So,
Yeah, she's so great. And there wasn't enough Billy Eichner. I'm sorry. I love Billy Eichner. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very irritated by that.
Eichner in my life.
I was glad to see Trixie Mattel. I will say that.
Yeah.
But I mean, also like barely any Hannah Gadsby, and didn't.
Yeah. Well, Hannah Gadsby wasn't in the, I don't believe was in the special. I think that was an interview that was separate from, at least I don't remember seeing Hannah Gadsby in that special.
And also, it was interesting that all the times Rosie O'Donnell was on screen, she was talking about like her talk show and things like that. And they didn't talk about her like nearly 20-year-long stand-up career that came before or her film career. Yeah.
A film career.
If you watch some of Rosie O'Donnell's old specials, she was a great stand-up comedian. She was great,
Yeah, she was.
I don't know. So yeah, bizarre choices. Bizarre is not the right word.
Yeah. No, I think they're bizarre. I think there's some bizarre choices. I'll say it. But yeah, also, I mean, I get why, but also the amount of time that was spent focused on like Anita Bryant, the anti-gay activist. And it's like, that could have been more time, focused on another comedian. And like, I get it. We need to talk about, homophobia and oppression, of course, because a lot of comedy came out of that and a lot of things were a reaction. But also I'm like, do we need this much focus on her?
Yeah.
At least somebody made the joke that, I
don't know.
She was a terrible singer, which she was. I mean, she was a good singer in Pittsburgh. I don't know where she's from, but let's just say she was good in Buffalo. She was. Anyway, yeah. So, anybody have things to add?
Oh, well, there was a moment that you mentioned off mic, Dave, the about the Reagan administration. that I think is definitely worth noting. The comedians talk about how awful the Reagan administration was during the AIDS epidemic, but I hadn't realized until they played that audio clip that there were people in the White House literally laughing about gay people dying from AIDS.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe how disgusting and awful that was, even though I knew people in the White House were apathetic and didn't seem to care or treat the situation with any urgency. It was another thing to hear people laughing about it, and that just made me sick to my stomach.
Yeah, I mean, it was truly. I guess it's the difference between knowing those kinds of things went on in the White House and then actually hearing the proof.
Yeah.
Because I didn't like Ronald Reagan when I was 10 years old. I mean, I just always thought there's just something about this guy I just don't like, and I don't, and it turns out as I got older, it's because he was a like fucking born again asshole bigot piece of shit, who decided to run up all the deficits and debt in this country and let gay people die. So anyway, did I say something, Megan?
Yeah, no, you didn't say anything. Yeah, no, Ronald Reagan was a fucking disgusting monster. And you're absolutely right, Evan. That's a scene I'm glad did stay in the film. I'm glad they kept that in, because I think that is necessary, because you're right. You're both right. It's one thing to know, it's another thing to see, it's another thing to hear. And it was despicable and disgusting, because that's what it was. It was a joke. It was an absolute joke to them that, who cares? Who cares about if gay men are dying of AIDS? Who cares? And yeah, it's so disgusting and repugnant. People's cruelty and lack of compassion is just fucking horrifying.
Well, I don't want to end this episode with me sobbing. So, so I mentioned that thing off mic.
Sounded like you had more to say, Megan.
What?
It sounded like Megan had
more
to say about the documentary.
Oh, I did. Yeah, thank you. I had forgotten because we went on that really horrifying note. Yeah, I actually did not know that Richard Pryor was queer, and so I was really glad that there was a moment where we see that in the Star Spangled Nights that Lily Tomlin headlined and Richard Pryor did too, and they were friends, and he talks about it. And yeah, I was really glad about that. I didn't know. And yeah, and this is like a minor thing, but and he's not a comedian, so I'm kind of surprised he's here. But I love Dave Holmes, and I'm always excited to see him, and I was glad. And I will say that even though not every single talking head was someone who performed at the comedy special, I like that everybody they had who was a talking head was a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And I think that was great. Yeah. I think I just wanted more.
Yeah,
I needed more.
It's lacking in a way.
Yeah.
Like I said, heart in the right place, but editing choice is not in the right place.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Oh, I will say there was one more. I knew there was another thing. Fortune Feimster, when she talked about how people would tell her that, well, first of all, I like how she said her first headlining event was at Pulse nightclub. And today, when we're recording this, is the 8-year anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting, which is horrifying and tragic, of course. What I did like is that I like how she said that she was told that queer kids were using her comedy special as a litmus test for how their parents would react to gay people before they would, kind of measure whether or not they would come out. And I like that. And sometimes I feel like representation a bit ago, like few years ago, was seen as such a, huge thing. And now I feel like there's kind of like a slight, I don't want to say backlash to it, but it's kind of like, oh, is it really that important? Is it really that, does it really move the needle? Does it really make a change? And it's not the only way to make a change, but yeah, I would argue it does. It really does matter. It really is important to see yourself. It really is important to hear those stories and to see yourself. And in part, that's one way, is that people, can open up dialogue. They can be authentically themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved hearing that too. And I also love her as a comedian.
Okay, I ask again, are there any final thoughts?
I actually do have more, but I feel like we would just be here. I feel like I'd just be rehashing the things I liked. So
Okay. Fair enough. Evan, are you good, sir?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, let's recap. Megan, Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yay or nay?
Yeah. I think your mileage may vary. I enjoyed it. It's a weird movie, but it's not going to be for everybody.
Yeah. It's like, listeners, when you've got your car and you're looking at the odometer and it's got the A and the B choices. And you're like, this is the mileage from my house to work every day. And then this is the mileage from work to the gym. It's your mileage may vary. And how do we feel about Outstanding, a comedy revolution? I mean, I think there's nothing that makes me say, skip it,
No, I don't think so. I think I would say see it, but I think, Megan, you raised the question of who's the audience for this piece. I think probably the primary audience of this is people who are into comedy and like watching comedians talk about comedy. And then I would say the secondary / overlap of that audience is people who love comedy and people in the LGBTQ plus community who love comedy, who would get more enjoyment out of this than the average viewer.
I buy that.
Yeah, I also agree that I don't think it's like, oh, don't see this, because it's really interesting I think it's interesting hearing people talk about their craft. I think it's interesting hearing these are all really talented, really interesting comedians who have important stories to tell. So I think that's worth hearing. I just wish this was a better documentary.
Yeah, I agree with both of you.
Same.
So, well, that's the love fest we needed on Spoiler Piece. Alrighty, gang. That wraps it up for this episode of the aforementioned Spoiler Piece. I'm going to say Spoiler Piece one more time. Spoiler Piece, that was twice. You just heard us say what we thought of the movies we saw this week. I want to give a huge thank you to our editor, Otto Clammer.
Thanks, Otto.
Thanks, Otto.
Otto, thanks for doing the heavy lifting each week and making us sound great. You can find Spoiler Piece anywhere you get podcasts. You can find our website, spoilerpiece.com, where we do stuff on the website. If you want to follow us on social media. I was going to say social website. I can't. I don't know. I need more sleep.
Your mouth is tired.
I know. I yap a lot, and it's finally like, this is just wrap this shit up, Dave. On social media, we're Spoiler Piece Theater on Facebook. We're at Spoiler Piece on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Threads. If you'd like to send us an email, the email address is spoilerpiece@gmail.com, or you can give us a call
at 862-21-PIECE.
Please leave us a voicemail and let us know which comedians you would have wanted to see more of in the Outstanding documentary. Not that the documentary is outstanding. It's called Outstanding.
Outstanding, a comedy revolution.
If you like the show, please rate and review us by going to ratethispodcast.com/spoilerpiece, or you can rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you really, really like the show, please check out our Patreon. I mentioned at the top that we watched John Carpenter's Stephen King's Christine this week, and we had a whole lot of fun talking about that truly unusual movie. Yeah.
Vroom, vroom.
I'm thinking about it now, and it's just like, man, talk about odd choices. Anyway, my name is Dave Riedel. I write about movies. I'm a member of the Boston Online Film Critics Association, and you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Threads, and Blue Sky, Dave Sees Movies.
My name is Evan Crean. I'm co-chair of the Boston Online Film Critics Association and co-author of Your 80s Movie Guide to Better Living. I'm also co-host of the It's the Pictures podcast, and you can follow me on social media as Real Recon, and that's real as in film reel.
And my name is Megan Kearns. I write for Edge Media Network. I'm a co-host of the Slashers podcast. I too am a member of BAFCA, and I'm also a member of Gallica. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Opinion S World, or on Instagram and Letterboxd at The Opinion S.
Thanks for listening, everyone. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.